Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Massachusetts Division of Marine Fisheries and the Urban Harbors Institute of UMass Boston, thank you so much for joining this virtual briefing on the needs and opportunities within the Massachusetts seafood system. My name is Kristen Uterwick. I'm the director of the Urban Harbors Institute at UMass Boston, and I have the pleasure of moderating our discussion today. As many of you on this webinar already know, the seafood system in Massachusetts is complex. It consists of those who are growing and catching the seafood, those that buy it, those that eat it, those that study it, those that maintain the infrastructure that supports it, those that regulate it, and so on. Members of our wonderful panel today represent the different aspects of the Commonwealth seafood system, and they're going to offer their insights on what can be done to keep some parts of the seafood system working well, and also share their thoughts on where more is needed in order to address specific issues or capitalize on new and anticipated opportunities. We hope that the information that they share and the discussions that take place can help inform your ongoing and future efforts to support the seafood system here in Massachusetts. Before we get going, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First of all, it would be great if everybody could just introduce themselves in the chat, say where you're from today or where you're calling from today. Second of all, this webinar is being recorded. Hopefully you all received a notification of that as you entered, but I just wanted to repeat it. And then lastly, towards the end of the session, we will be taking questions. You're welcome to put questions in the chat during the webinar, but we will also take questions via the raise hand function. In terms of format, today's discussion will start with each of the panelists introducing themselves and speaking briefly about their work. And then we'll move into a series of facilitated questions, and each of our speakers will then, with each of our speakers, and then open the floor to you all to ask questions. So, Julia, can we get the next slide, please? Our list of wonderful speakers here today is Cassie Canastra, Director of Operations at Base Seafood in New Bedford. Wendy Minardi, Program Coordinator with the Massachusetts Seafood Marketing Program at the Division of Marine Fisheries. Story Reed, Assistant Director at Mass Division of Marine Fisheries. Angela Sanfilippo, President of the Gloucester Fishermen's Wives Association. Kim Starbuck, Senior Research Associate at the Urban Harbors Institute at UMass Boston. And Doreen Leggett, Communications Officer at the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance. So we have a great group of speakers today. Each of them is going to introduce themselves and give a brief overview of some of their work in the seafood system. And I believe we're starting with Story. So Story, take it away.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks for putting this together. So good afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to attend today. My name is Story Reed, as Kristen said, and I'm an Assistant Director at the Division of Marine Fisheries. I focus on permitting, statistics, and fisheries management issues in state waters. I'd also like to recognize our Department of Fish and Game Deputy Commissioner, Safathia Romeo-Taken, who I believe is joining us today. At the Division of Marine Fisheries, we are charged with not only researching and regulating the Commonwealth's living marine resources, but we also work to promote recreational fishing, commercial fishing, and the seafood industry as a whole. I think it is important to set the stage for this conversation today with a brief description of the importance of the seafood industry to the Massachusetts economy. In addition to being part of the Commonwealth's history and heritage, as we all know, Massachusetts is still a leading seafood producer and processor of seafood. The total ex-vessel value, or the amount paid directly to the harvesters at the first point of sale, was a combined $840 million across all species in 2021. You can see from the graph on this slide how that compares to previous years. 2021 is the top yellow line, and you can see that the ex-vessel value of seafood landed in Massachusetts was significantly higher in 2021 than recent years. This graph is interesting because it tracks the cumulative value of seafood landed throughout the calendar year. It's also worth noting that the seafood value in 2020, displayed in orange in this figure, was down significantly due to COVID-19 impacts to the seafood markets. You can see from the top 10 species in terms of value list on the right that the value of seafood landings in Massachusetts is driven by sea scallops and lobster landings value. Lobster and oyster are the most valuable species coming from nearshore state waters. Next slide, Julia. This top 10 port list in terms of value shows us that New Bedford has the highest valued seafood landings of any port in the country, actually, driven by sea scallop landings. But beyond New Bedford, you can see the top 10 ports in terms of ex-vessel value are spread out geographically throughout the state. If we kept going down the list beyond the top 10, you would quickly see other North Shore and South Shore municipalities. The species landed in these ports vary greatly depending on location. For example, Gloucester's landings value is driven by lobster and ground fish. Boston's landings are driven by ground fish, while many Cape Cod communities have significant shellfish aquaculture landings in addition to the other species. Massachusetts is situated in a unique geographic location, which contributes to this diversity of species landed. We have the cool waters of the Gulf of Maine to the north and the warm waters of the Gulf Stream flowing from south to north towards Georges Bank. So with the stage set on the scope of the seafood industry in Massachusetts, I'm excited to hear from the other panelists on specific initiatives going on right now in the seafood industry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Story. I think next we'll hear from Wendy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. The Seafood Marketing Program at the Division of Marine Fisheries has the goal of increasing awareness and demand for our Massachusetts seafood. The program has been in existence for about 7 years, and we have a steering committee made up of legislators, industry heads, industry and advocates, and we're funded by a portion of commercial fishing permits that are funneled at no additional cost to the permit holder. And this is just a smattering today of things that we do. So we have an educational, we have this logo here, this Massachusetts Seafood logo, and what that really acts as is it helps us, with our education that we do. We reworked this like 1980s DMF seafood logo that you see here, this small one, and I think it's been very popular. We've had great success working with many partners throughout the state, especially through our grant program, which was the largest this year, thanks to Woods Hole Sea Grant. So here you see we sponsored a food, boat, car, kitchen thing at the local farmers markets across the state one summer. We sponsored that, and then we work with Mass Farm to School to get seafood and education in schools. We work with industry and businesses to bring buyers together at the Seafood Expo North America. And there's a ribbon cutting on our Mass Ave. And we do, during the pandemic, we put together 30 recipes from local chefs for home cooking of seafood and posted it to our social media that reaches over 10,000 people. And this billboard that you see on the right is live right now. So that's through Mass Department of Transportation. And then you may have heard our radio advertising the past 3 summers through iHeartRadio. So that's just a few things that we do. We could go to the next slide, Julia. So while I have your attention, I just wanted to tell everyone to please ask your server or retailer for the local catch. And remind everyone that there's a wide variety of seafood out there that's available, and we're lucky to have it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Wendy. Next, I think we'll hear from Cassie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Cassie Canastra. I'm the Director of Operations for Base Seafood in New Bedford. And if you haven't heard of us, Base stands for Buyers and Sellers Exchange. It's the seafood auction for the Port of New Bedford. We also have a Gloucester location, but I would say the primary business we have is done in New Bedford. We have 2 auctions, one for scallops and one for ground fish. As you probably know, seeing as scallops is the lead driver in revenue for the state of Mass when it comes to seafood. Scallops is our biggest seafood sales that we do here. We're probably the largest seafood offloader for scallops on the East Coast. I would say we do probably 70% of the entire fishery comes to our building. So we're doing really great with scallops, but with ground fish, we have seen quite a decline since 2010 when the sector system began. So I would say regulations have kind of put a halt to our ground fish landings, with really only about 12 active ground fish boats still fishing in the port of New Bedford, when probably in 2010 there was north of 100. So it has been challenging seeing volumes coming in, but we're trying. We've actually invested in 3 boats that we've purchased ourselves as a company, and they're going ground fishing. So we've kind of seen the need to reinvest and try to bring in more landings in hopes that we can market our local seafood. So I would say for us, we really have taken a focus on ground fish, looking at species like haddock, redfish, and pollock, the 3 species that we actually have a lot of quota for and can land a lot of, and trying to market those species. So we're a member of the Massachusetts Seafood Collaborative, and that's looking to try to get, government grants from the state to supply local food, like food pantries, hopefully schools, prison systems, stuff like that, with our local fish. We're big, we're trying to promote, I call it our sustainable seafood that we land here. So really the thing that we have the most volume coming in on. So we focus a lot on that, and we're just hoping to keep building. And we're looking to buy more boats and just try to keep expanding, and also looking to help people within our community to want to maybe invest or diversify. So scallop vessels that really only go scalloping for 40 days out of the fishing year, maybe they would want to start ground fishing and looking to do that. So we're just trying to really expand our ground fish program. So that's kind of what we focus on. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. I believe next we're going to hear from Angela.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Angela Sanfilippo, and I'm listed as the president of the Gloucester Fisherman's Wife, that I am. But I also work with 2 more organizations, which is the Massachusetts Fishermen Partnership, Fishing Partnership Support Services, and I'm a new board member at the Massachusetts Seafood Collaborative that came about of the need that COVID created. The Gloucester Fisherman's Wife have been around since 1969. There was the group of people who petitioned Congress and created the state magazine Stevens had in 1977. I wasn't there. I came along a little bit later. The mission of the organization is to promote and preserve the Gloucester, Massachusetts, New England commercial fishery, and help active and retired members to live a better life. So it really gives us a big opportunity to hear everything that could damage the fishing industry. In the last 2 years since COVID struck, we realized that our industry was not prepared to be able to bring more local seafood as it was needed. We saw the landings go up, people standing in line for miles trying to buy local seafood. And at that point, we realized what we've been thinking about is that we need to modernize the fishing industry. The fishing industry is still like in the 1960s. We need to modernize. And when I talk about modernize, is use equipment that will help the fishermen on the boats, as well as the seafood processors, do it faster and get a better product. As you can see in the screen, we helped fishermen write grants to buy gutting machine. Until then, fishermen have cut their fish by hand. And I was like totally shocked when the fisherman who had just put a gutting machine in the boat explained to me what happens. He says, look at this way. If we get 5,000 pound of haddock, cod, pollock, the fish that needs to be gutted, it's going to take 2 of us 5 hours to gut this fish. In the meantime, the fish is sitting on deck. Either if it's too hot, it's going to spoil. If it's too cold, it's going to freeze. By putting this gutting machine in their boats, they can cut 31 fish per minute. And he said, well, what would have taken us 5 hours, only took us 2 hours, which in addition to that, what happens is that they be on the ocean for less 3 hours, which then they will cut down on their CO2 carbons. These gutting machines are amazing. It took a long time to get them because they come from Denmark. They're not made in the United States, but it's what we need in addition to everything else, because We also having crew problems, trying to find good crew to go fishing. So these machinery will help people bring home a better quality seafood that will have a much longer shelf life and be there when it's needed. We are working on many different projects together with the Fishing Partnership Super Service. We are working on a 21st Century project, which is basically says an assessment of the whole Massachusetts fishing industry and what is needed to modernize the industry. And at the same time, also professionalize the fishermen. And on that part, we've done safety training, God, for about 20 years. We do stability courses. We do CPR training, medical training. We are working tirelessly in giving the fishermen what they need to be able to fish. And I make them laugh. I says, you are very valuable to us because if you get sick, there's nobody to replace you. So we would really drag them in to go and do all these things. A lot more needs to be done, and we need a lot of more money to really do this. And we hope and that everyone who's listening to us today, they will support us when we make the request of what we need. I am in Gloucester. Gloucester is the oldest commercial fishing port in the United States. We do get all kinds of variety of fish, and it's beautiful. Gloucester lands the most lobsters in the whole state, and we stand by our industry. And in addition, what happened under COVID is that when seafood producer in Boston called and said, we have no people to work, we cannot cut the fish, help, we need help. Well, we got together and we formed a collaborative, which now we have brought everybody together between the fishing people who go on their boats and the people that work in the seafood industry. And we have many plans to move forward, but we must modernize this industry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. And we'll hear much more about what the needs and the opportunities are in the coming questions. Kim, I think we're hearing from you next.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for attending. My name is Kim Starbuck. I'm a senior research associate at the Urban Harbors Institute at UMass Boston. And I'm here to talk about commercial fishing infrastructure in Massachusetts. Specifically, we worked on a study with DMF, which was finalized last year in 2021. And the study intended to conduct an inventory and an assessment of the Massachusetts commercial fishing industry, specifically looking at activity and then infrastructure. So really, we were trying to get a sense of the importance of the industry to Massachusetts, and then what infrastructure is currently in place, infrastructure being docks, piers, hoists, ice machines, and trying to understand what's in place right now, and then what are the needs of the industry, because we had heard from a number of fishermen that they didn't have the infrastructure that they need to be able to succeed and to grow. So the methodology for our study was we conducted surveys of harbor masters and of fishermen and asked them specifically about what type of fish are caught in the different ports, and then also asked them about what type of infrastructure is available in the ports, and then what are the needs of those ports to be able to continue having fishing in that port, and then also to be able to grow that industry. I'll be talking a little bit more in a little bit about the results of the study, but really we looked at what's the importance of the fishery to Massachusetts, or of all the different fisheries to Massachusetts, and then what are the big infrastructure issues like shallow water, lack of affordable berthing, loading and unloading space for catches, we found is really kind of limited in some areas, and then a lack of parking and ramp access. So there are these big infrastructure issues, and how might we be able to move forward and help solve some of those issues. So we developed this report, which the cover is right here, port by port, and that's available online. And then if you go to the next slide, we also developed port profiles, which are basically profiles for all of these different coastal communities, over 70 coastal communities in Massachusetts. We develop profiles for these different ports that have commercial fishing happening, and looked at what fish are being landed in the ports, how much money is being brought in. So what's the X value? And you can see on the left is the cover of the port profile. On the right is some graphics that are in each port profile. This is specific to Barnstable, but how much money is coming into, this is specifically Barnstable, from fishing. And then what are the annual landings and active harvesters? And then in each of these port profiles, we also identified what are the infrastructure needs for those specific communities. So we worked on this very closely with Mass Division of Marine Fisheries, who helped analyze a lot of the data and helped us create these graphics, and then also the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance. So I'll stop there, but I'll talk a little bit more about the infrastructure challenges later.
Thanks so much, Kim. And last but not least, we have Doreen.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Stephanie Sykes is the outreach coordinator, and she would be here, but there was like a weather window where it wasn't supposed to be windy today, so she was supposed to go fishing. So I'm filling in for her, so that's why her name is there. So as I said, my name is Doreen Legg, and I handle communications for the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance. There's a lot of Chatham people on this call, which I am really happy about. So they know we're based in Chatham, but I'm just going to say who we are anyway. So we're based in Chatham. We represent all of the Cape, and we just celebrated our 30th anniversary. We take the lead from our fishermen members, and we do a lot of advocacy, economic development, policy work focused on sustainable small boat fisheries and healthy coastal communities. We take pride in our small boats, big ideas mindset, and we've also started different programs like Small Boats, Big Taste, Small Boats, Big Science, because science obviously is very important in fisheries now. The growing interest in eating local, which we definitely advocate for, has coincided with the graying of the fleet. So a lot of fishermen are retiring. We don't have a lot of young fishermen entering the profession. So we have spent a lot of time focused on fishermen training, not only to prepare the next generation for a career on the water, but to give them the tools to succeed in an increasingly difficult economy, market landscape, environment, regulatory structure. And I'm going to talk a lot more about the fisherman training program later in the conversation. Hopefully this slide will pop back up at that moment. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Doreen. As y'all can see, we have a fantastic group of panelists here representing a wide variety of different parts of the seafood system. So we're going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes answering a few questions. I have two of them, and they're both two parts. So the first question is, and this.
Can I just jump in real quick?
Oh,
so
sure, Julia.
After you say the question, I've allowed everybody to talk so that our attendees, so if they could just raise their hand if they had something to say, and then that way we kind of, people aren't talking over each other. I think that would work pretty well.
Sounds good. So panelists, raise your hand when you're ready to answer the question. First question is, what is the major challenge, or maybe top two challenges that you see in the seafood system today? And if money, regulations, and other real world restrictions were no problem, how would you address the challenge or challenges? So who wants to take that first?
I can go if you want me to. I don't know if we were going in order, but one of the major challenges in the seafood system is workforce and professional development, and the lack of crew and captains entering the commercial fisheries. The lack of candidates for jobs is not unique to the fisheries. Obviously, it's happening all over the state and like basically every occupation, but it is more pronounced because of the variety of factors that are specific to the commercial fisheries, including a lack of infrastructure, seesaw and catch limits, which make it difficult to build a business plan. There's gentrification around ports, and the fact that many people don't know that people can have a successful career in the fisheries that they can be proud of. Broadly, workforce training helps draw attention to those issues, and specifically It gets people who want a meaningful career in the fisheries, the training they need in what can be a dangerous and complex occupation, and also gets them connected with captains who are already on the water. With partner groups and fishermen across the nation, we fought hard for probably more than 5 years, probably closer to 7, to get the Young Fishermen's Development Act passed. And it's modeled after a similar program for farmers and ranchers. And we're grateful for that program. And we're also grateful for our current work. We've worked with Sea Grant to develop like a scope out a more intensive training program. That kind of is going to talk about how training can be specifically tailored. But before the act was passed 2 years ago, we were getting, I guess, I don't know if frustrated is the word, but we definitely wanted training program in quicker. So we started our own with state and national funding, including some from DMF, so thank you, because training was really important to our fleets. And what we noticed was the commercial fishermen are very strong-minded. They don't always agree on things, but as far as when it comes to commercial fishing training, everyone agreed. They were really supportive. They volunteered their time because it was something they thought was really necessary. We've had 2 several-day sessions, which include an overview of local fisheries and crew responsibilities, expectations, certification, at-sea survival techniques, everything from basic knot tying. I don't know if the slide can pop back up because it has some images on it, but if you can see from that slide, there's in the water training, work with flares and other things. And then we had fishermen captains come in and they talked about everything from aquaculture to longline for haddock, harpooning tuna, lobstering, scallop dragging, clam dredging, gill netting for skates and dogfish. And this whole interacting with the captains is important because the fisheries are different and many do more than one fishery. So you have to switch from one fishery to another. We worked with Cape Cod Tech. Cape Cod Tech used to have a program just for commercial fishermen a while ago, but that was phased out. So we got back in there and had fishermen come talk to the students. We had the students go out on or visit boats. They didn't go out in the boats. They visited boats and the captains talked about their work today and how some captains have profit sharing. All these things are important that people didn't realize. We also work with the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce and the Blue Economy Foundation and this thing called Waterworks, where people from like high school students, juniors and seniors from all over the Cape come to this event at Cape Cod Community College, and they learn about commercial fishing and how important it is and how it is a sustainable career and well-paying, and people can stay on the Cape. Some people think commercial fishing is like this old school, a guy goes out, he has a beard, yellow jacket, pipe, comes back in, sells his fish, and that just doesn't happen. So the people that are going to commercial fishing today need to be prepared. They need to know about management. They have to be plugged in to trends. They're constantly updating and reevaluating, thinking about their next step. They're battling for access, working waterfronts. And they're usually right in the middle of like the waterfronts, at least on the Cape, are like right in the middle of like multi-million-dollar homes, like luxury resorts. So they need a lot of support and training to deal with all these other winds and conflicts that are coming up. So that was my answer to that one question.
Great. Thank you so much, Doreen. I think you covered a lot of really important topics. Kim, I see your hand is up.
Yes, so I can add to that, specifically thinking about the study that we worked with DMF and the Cape Cod Commercial Fishermen's Alliance on. So, we looked a lot at the infrastructure issues and challenges happening throughout Massachusetts. And I briefly mentioned them, but one of the biggest ones that came up in the study was shallow water and the need for dredging. And in our report, we mention a lot of different issues and challenges and then add in recommendations or opportunities for improvement. If funding was not an issue, that would be wonderful because then we could get all of the dredging done that we would like to, which obviously I'm sure a lot of you know, there's a lot of shallow water out there that needs to be dredged. But we also came up with some ideas for funding and also the thought of creating dredge management plans to help prioritize areas that need dredging. Also, the lack of berthing for fishermen, which included affordable berthing. And that includes lack of docks, lack of moorings, lack of longer term storage on the water, and also just high costs for berthing. So some ideas for that is potentially installing new docks, new moorings, or dedicating some of these docks and moorings specifically to commercial fishermen. Also, some of these areas need some repair, so really identifying what needs repair. More space to unload gear and catches, and that includes also maybe adding in some hoists and possibly looking at the space that's available now and reconfiguring that, or creating more space. And that could also involve hiring somebody to help regulate who's unloading and when they're unloading. Lack of parking was really big. Parking can be really expensive. And also a lot of the streets are very congested and narrow, which makes it hard for the trucks to find places to go. So potentially identifying some additional areas for parking, or designating parking for fishermen, and then also possibly reducing the restrictions on overnight parking that are happening in a lot of areas. And then one final thing I'll mention, lack of launch ramps. So need for more launch ramps. And then a lot of the launch ramps are very crowded, and they have a lot of congestion. So maybe hiring somebody to help facilitate people entering the water and coming out of the water, or also possibly extending the season for launch ramps. So those were some of the big things that we noted in our report.
Thanks so much, Kim. Yeah, it's funny how parking is the death knell for so much that happens along the water. Story.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple things that come to mind for challenges. Right now, this morning, I've heard from a couple people about rising expenses. Every day I hear it from our commercial fleet, and it's, you know, we're all facing it, right, in our everyday lives. But if you think of a lobster boat, there's diesel fuel, there's bait that is exponentially more expensive than it was a few years ago. And dockage, we've already talked about. The list goes on. So that's a major challenge this year, especially in this inflationary period we're in. And another thing we're looking at right now with our Marine Fisheries Advisory Commission is the aging of the fleet, but more specifically, the aging of our permit holders, right? So if I had a slide up on the screen that would show you the median age of the permit holders in many of our permit categories, like coastal lobster, things like that, you would see that it's 60 or older for many of these fisheries. So that's where the training comes in, of course, but also we have to take a step back as a state agency and look at our limited entry permit scheme, and how could we rework within our rules or potentially change rules to make it those permits more accessible to the next generation of fishermen. So that's something we're working on right now. You know, of course, that's not easy, but we're working on it with our advisory commission and with fishermen to get their perspective on that. So I just wanted to bring that up as a challenge as well.
Thanks, Story. Angela, I see your hand is up.
Yes. One of the big challenge in our view is also educating the public about eating local seafood. The way the public responds is that becomes a trend. Right now, the trend is eating salmon and lobster and haddock, but our fishermen this spring have fished for flounder as they usually do, and they've not been able to sell that flounder to any other seafood producers, and they complain that they're not getting the orders from the restaurant. And on top of that, they don't have no fish cutters that have the skill to fillet flounders. If we can convince the public that the way we fish is not just by being filleted, but you can use a whole fish, you can cook a whole fish, the lives of our fishing people would be much, much better. As Story just mentioned, the present price for fuel is very out of control. I got a call from a boat that said that they came in and they stocked $100,000. They paid $47,000 for fuel. And everything else that needed to be paid had gone tripled. So by the end, they were not even able to give each crew member on their boat more than $1,000. And at that point, the crew member says, I'm not going fishing to allow everybody else to make a living and killing myself. So, and I've talked this with Wendy many times. We need to, it's the biggest challenge is we need to educate the public. It's like when there was all that big propaganda about cod, we needed to save cod, don't use cod. And I would say to the public, well, if instead of you going to the fish market and always demand haddock and cod, you can diversify, then the fishermen can do even better job at not catching it. Not because there is none, no, because they're not allowed to have one, but because if the public can diversify in the consumption of the local seafood, it would be the miracle. Everything that our boats catch should be brought to the shore and should be sold and people eat it. A lot of our seafood gets wasted because people are so picky on what they eat. So I see we talked about the young fisherman training. We also did a pilot program last year, and now we are revising the criteria. We did the safety training this fall, just to give you an idea. We did 3 sections of safety sea training. We got 159 people in 3 sections. The fishermen are coming around. They want to be educated. They want to be modernized. It's just that if we can bring a product to the shore and cannot be sold because lack of people knowing that it's a eatable seafood, that is a big challenge. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Thanks, Angela. Great points. Wendy, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely I agree with everything that Angela said. And, wanted to mention that less than 20% of Americans eat the recommended amount of seafood. And pre-pandemic, 2/3 of our seafood expenditure was in restaurants. The pandemic, changed the landscape of this industry. Retailers, started did really well and are still doing well because people, turned to their became more aware of their local protein source, et cetera. In a survey that we did at DMF, we learned that frozen was up, local was up with retailers. But the biggest challenge that I will mention is, also the prices are up of seafood too, so which is a challenge to get more people to eat seafood, of course. But the biggest challenge right now that I want to mention is that the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch red listed Massachusetts lobster. Beth Cassoni, the head of the Massachusetts Lobster Association, is on this call now. This has been devastating to everyone who's worked so hard to do everything they can and more. So I want to encourage everyone to reach out to Beth if they have any questions or concerns. In a brief call that I had with the MLA earlier this week, I think to answer Kristen's question, if there was unlimited funding, green bans to deal with the traceability, to get recognition for all the work that's being done in terms of meeting the regulations, and also a whole lot of consumer education. And we're going to actually we're actually going to work with NPR this holiday season and try to steer people towards lobster. That's all for me. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Cassie, did you want to answer this question at all?
Sure. So challenges, I mean, I probably could go on and probably reiterate a lot of what everyone else said, especially Angela, but I would say on a fishing perspective, challenges definitely are fuel. I mean, my vessel, for example, the other day had a $100,000 stock too, and his fuel bill was $50,000. So that's half the stock. And it makes it near impossible, really, for him to go fishing. So that's concerning if fuel prices go up, and there's really not much you can do about that. I mean, we try our best to, not charge the boat for quota that trip. So he can make a check. So, but, and then another thing would be quota. And that's obviously regulations and science, but really like species being cut dramatically with no explanation or much science to support that. I mean, hake's a problem for us. There really isn't much out there to be had in the lease market, and my boat can't seem to avoid them. So that's challenging because you're trying to target other species like haddock and can't because of the choke species like hake. So I would say for us, those are some constraints that prevent. I mean, I can tell you that a good month, the month of August for us was the best month my captain's ever had ground fishing. And he just happened to be landing the haddock consistently, doing great. Fuel prices seem to get a little bit better then. And it's possible for a boat to do well and to see it do well. So, I mean, we're optimistic, but obviously these challenges are not, they're kind of out of our hands and out of our control. So that's one thing. And then on the market side, really, it's just getting more vessels to kind of want to do what we're doing. The more volume you have coming into market, then you have something to actually market in interest. We see a lot of our buyers, if we don't have an auction every single day, then they lose interest and they look at other species, they look at imports to fill orders, and you don't see our local haddock at like a Stop and Shop or at Shaw's because they can't commit to it. So because they don't know if the volume is going to be there on a regular basis. So it's something that we're trying to build up, but it is hard to build up when you don't have a lot of other people doing the same thing, and you really don't get those commitments from the larger groceries, this is the chain. So that's a challenge for us too.
Thanks, Cassie. I think we have one other question, and we also have about just over 10 minutes, 14 minutes to include questions from the audience as well. So the next question, let's get to it because I think it's really important, but perhaps we'll keep our answers to 1 or 2 minutes if that's possible, panelists. And it's really the flip side of the first question, which is what are the opportunities that you see in the seafood system and what's needed to take advantage of those opportunities? So again, we'll just do raise your hand as you want to speak. And Kim?
Sorry, it's muted. I can jump in and try to be quick. Just thinking about infrastructure specifically, as there are changes happening in our ports, like for instance, the development of offshore wind or changes happening with climate change, it would be helpful, I think, to when people are thinking about maybe restructuring ports or moving things higher because of climate change, to also think about changes that could also benefit the commercial fishing industry. So, thinking about parking, if there is some changes happening because of climate change and the community is thinking of moving around different things on their waterfront, maybe they could put in some additional parking for fishermen or, just ideas like that. That would be my quick answer.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for being quick too.
Yeah, no problem.
Who else would like to go? Story, go for it.
Okay, just a couple things. I think conversations like this and the work that all the panelists are doing, things like the Port Profile Project, what Angela is doing to assess the needs for innovation are really important because they do lead to opportunities. They might not always be as much as the industry needs, but they're a start. And so 2 things come to mind is one, because of the Port Profile Project, or sort of using the Port Profile Project where dredging was brought up as an issue, we were able to get some money in the state budget for this fiscal year to do some work looking at the winter flounder time of year restrictions, with the idea that maybe those could be relaxed a little bit with new research. And then second, we're administering an economic innovation grant program right now that I know Angela was a big advocate for, and that is out on the street now for applications, and that could hopefully start the process of, or continue and really get going the process of innovation in the fleet. So all the work that goes on in forums like this can lead to things like that. So I just want to mention those 2.
Great. Thanks, Story. Wendy.
Real quick, the opportunities here, just eating seasonally, eating locally, eating lesser known species involving chefs, the work that, Angela and others have been doing for decades. Specifically, I see an opportunity in more education schools, which I'm working with a couple of organizations on that now. And another fresh opportunity is that there's a new bill in Congress right now that would reestablish National Seafood Council. So that would be a sort of nationwide seafood marketing program, essentially. So, I'd be excited to see what happens with that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Wendy. Angela, Doreen, Cassie, any of you guys want to talk about opportunities?
Yeah, just quickly, I think that I don't know if this is an opportunity or the strength of, like, the greatest strength of the fisheries, or would be, the men and women that are in the fisheries that power the industry, trusting to bring in the food that feeds the nation, that kind of thing. I was talking to a fisherman the other day, and I swear, this is much shorter than it was, and he was, he just mackerel, so he treats his mackerel very well. Like, he slushes it. There's a big box on his box in his boat, so he can't really bring in as much. It takes him a lot more time, but he takes good care of it. And if it goes to, like, people eating it, it's like $1.20. And if it goes to, I know bait is more expensive, but it's like, say, 20 cents. And he was going to get 20 cents for it. So I asked him, I was like, oh, so you're still doing the slushing, you're still doing all that extra stuff? And he looked at me, he's like, well, yeah. I mean, people might eat this fish, so I'm going to do what I have to do to bring in the best quality fish. And I know I'm not a fisherman. I can't fish. Like, I don't have that mindset, but just talking, they take this really personally. So I take this really personally. So they do a lot. They work really hard. So.
Great. Thanks, Doreen. You're a good voice for those that aren't actually speaking for themselves today. So thanks for sharing that story. Cassie or Angela? Angela, I see your hand.
But I want to add to what Doreen just said. When I talk about the public, the consumers, they have in mind that because it's not a haddock and cod, they can pay cheap for it. Well, when the fishermen go out and catch the mackerel, he has the same expenses as when you go out and catch haddock and cod. People we have to break that barrier, because, like I said, it costs the same money. It's a healthy seafood, does the same thing to you. Actually, in the case of mackerel, it's even better, omega-3 in it. And it's all, this thing about it's not haddock and cod and lobster, so it's a cheaper fish. And this is why probably the consumer don't put a value to it. So, but that is important, because like I said, it costs the same money to go catch haddock or to go and catch mackerel. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. Cassie, did you want to answer anything?
I think I'd probably just say a lot of the same things that Angela said, but thank you.
Sure. All right. So now we have a little bit of time for questions from the audience. And I saw one question come in. Shannon, are you able to share that one?
Yeah, there is one question in the chat that asked, what state and federal grant funds are available for training and waterfront infrastructure development?
Thanks. Does anybody want to take a stab at that?
I know that the Fishermen's Alliance, received NIFWIF funds, which is on a federal level. And then I mentioned just for fishermen's training I'm talking about right now. And they're a state that got funds from the state budget the first year, and then DMF has helped. And there are I'm sure other people can come up with Sea Grant has some, as I mentioned, funding for scoping grants. There are other groups too. I'm sure Story could probably jump in and has idea of grant funding.
Yeah, I think that was a good just summary. Different grants do pop up. It's probably worthy of another call just on that subject with folks that are in that realm. And Kristen, we might want to consider doing something like that in the future. But the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grants. You mentioned NIFWIF, definitely an annual opportunity for different things. Our seafood marketing program occasionally does small grants. We were able to partner with Sea Grant to bolster those in the previous year's round. So we can work on trying to make sure that those opportunities get out there when they're there.
Yeah, and I would just add the Massachusetts Seaport Economic Council is another great source of funding, especially for infrastructure related projects. That's a great question. More to come on that. I think I see a hand raised. Al?
Hi, everyone. I'm Al Catoni from the Gloucester. Gotta go. I'm sorry. I got an echo here. I gotta leave the room. I'm Al Catoni from the Gloucester Fisheries Commission. One thing that really hasn't been discussed much is upgrading localized fish handling and processing. I mean, I know we're light years behind Europe when it comes to fish processing, and there's tons of machinery out there, and that's going to take a significant investment for someone to come in and have a fish processing system that's going to be able to handle the local volume. So hopefully somewhere down the line, we can get somebody interested in that, maybe get some money available for someone to come in and start processing fish locally. And that's only going to help local markets to sell fish locally. Little fish stores can pop up. That we're lacking heavily in localized fish processing. So, that needs to be one of the big issues addressed to move this fishery into the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that comment. It's a great point you make, Al. Does anybody from the panel want to say anything about fish processing in Massachusetts? Any of the barriers that have, existed currently that make it difficult? Anything on the horizon?
I can respond to that too. The challenge is funding. You need funding to start up businesses, and when you do that, then those businesses will be up to the 21st century. But the funding is the problem. We are grateful that one of our local people got one of the big grants, and he's setting up a processing plan at the State Fish Pier. And he has boats that go for herring, but now in order for him to survive, he realized that he had to also process other seafood. And at the same time, it's seafood that is very much needed in a community like Gloucester, where we have very limited places where they, process seafood. So that is the key. It's funding for anything like that.
Yeah. Great point, Angela. And I think to Story's comment earlier, we should see if there's a way to circulate some funding opportunities that we're all aware of and get that to those of you participating today. Well, I see we're about out of time. I know we have Deputy Commissioner Romeo Thakin with us. Deputy Commissioner, I don't know if you wanted to say anything before we close.
I am thankful that you are having this meeting. I was listening to some of the concerns, and rightfully so. And if you want to know about fishing, just ask Wendy. She went on the boat with Al, so she'll be able to. It is hard when you really try to understand different cities, different communities. Doreen, Cassie were spot on, just like Angela. But the main thing is you want them to diverse. If they diverse, it's where they're going to bring them and who's going to cut them. Nobody's there to cut fish. I took a walk around the State Fish Pier where we do have a facility. He only has a piece of equipment. To get what they have in the European countries and to be able to do that is at least another a couple $1 million. And to a lot, that's a lot, but not to our OPI, not to the money that we had here to sustain. You want them to stop the codfish. Well, they can do. Grace Soul, when Joe from Pi de Pio, Angela's brother, said to me, I brought in some fish and I had to give it up for bait. And when he ever said Grace Soul, for any of us who know that fish, I cried. It's the best fish. And the fact is, like, you know what, we need to do something. And just by having this, you're already doing it. you know, you've got great people on here and great people in the chat too. So I want to thank you, and thanks Story for sending this to me, because it's really important that we do keep open the line of communication, because that's the only way we're going to get these things done. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for your remarks. And we have internally talked about potentially doing this again, at least next year, if not sooner. So we were aiming to do it in October during Seafood Month, but the month got away from us. So here we are, day after Election Day, providing this to distract you as the counts come in. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I especially want to thank our panelists for their time and great insights. I also want to thank Shannon Hogan from the Urban Harbors Institute and Julia Kaplan from the Division of Marine Fisheries for all their work behind the scenes. And you heard from them a little bit today, but they really helped to make today possible. If you have any questions or comments or want any follow-up information, certainly reach out to us. I think you guys all have my contact information. I think Stories was up on a slide previously. Definitely reach out to us. We're here as a resource, and hope to do this again in less than a year. So stay tuned. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.